Alright everyone, we start off today chuckling because finally the Beijing-Biden administration has found the one group of refugees that it doesn't want in the United States, and it just happens to be the one that we have a long tradition of actually accepting, and also the only one that doesn't tend to vote like massively liberal, and that's Cubans. Them literally warning, don't try to come, you will not be admitted to the United States. Now, when did we rescind the rule specifically where Cubans, if they sailed across when they set foot on usually Floridian soil, they were automatically granted asylum seeker status? Essentially, we had that in effect because the Castros were tyrannical commies, and we're like, well, you know, if you can get here, it's good for propaganda purposes, so we'll just let you in the country. Anyone who's willing to construct a raft out of plastic bottles and sail sight unseen across several hundred miles of treacherous shark-filled waters in order to set foot in Florida, maybe not even be able to do so, get picked up by the Coast Guard, get sent back to the Castros, and then killed. That's pretty ballsy. So generally, we've tolerated that. Apparently, Biden, who wants everyone else in the Latin American region to come to the United States, hey, if you walk across the unguarded border, you can stay forever. We're not going to deport you. Supposedly we will. We're begging you not to come, but yeah, you can come if you want. But Cubans? Oh no, not Cubans. Maybe he looked at their voting demographics and the fact that they kept Florida red in this last election because Bernie Sanders was praising Fidel Castro. I think we might have found the reason. Now, first and foremost down below, if you're watching this video on YouTube, there will be a pinned comment with links to 4 other video hosting sites that I use. Keep in mind, I make 4 videos a day, sometimes 5. Only 2 of them, or 3 if it's a special, end up on YouTube. So you're not getting all that great verboten commentary with regards to certain socio-political or now medical issues, because it's not allowed on YouTube. And also, you got to cut it down, because if you make more than 1 or 2 videos, the algorithm buries you even more than it normally does. So really, being a workhorse no longer pays off on YouTube. Condense it into 1 video or maybe 2. Anyway, this is downright shameful, because one of the few groups in the entire world that Americans, by and large, consider it to be good to have limitless numbers of, one group of refugees, is Cubans. When you have a person who's willing to go through that particular level of political risk to escape communism, the idea is that the United States takes legitimate refugees, but instead we've got millions of people in the country who are not legitimate refugees, should by all legal means be deported under currently long-standing congressionally passed law under several administrations, both Democrat and Republican. We should kick those people out of the country because they are breaking the law. They should not be given universal and permanent clemency, kicking the can down the road, keeping them in a weird status where they're not actually a lawful resident, but they're also not going to be considered as illegal for legal purposes. And it's just bullshit because it literally breaks the government's own rules. And we should take more Cubans in. Cubans, but I love it when Republicans oftentimes, the hardliners will say, well, the Republicans can never expect any group that's not white, straight Christian males to vote for them at large levels. Meanwhile, you look at Hispanic voters, and not just Cubans anymore, and it tells a little bit of a different story. This worries, I think, the ethno-nats as much as it worries the lowburls at this point. Here's the thing. Cubans are legitimate when they want to claim asylum. They're living under communism. When you look at the rest of Latin America, do Brazilians live under communism? No, there's systemic corruption, there's human rights abuses, there's certainly plenty of infrastructural problems there, but it's not hardline communism. About the only other group of people that you could conceive of that legitimately should be able to claim this title are the Venezuelans. But the thing is, most Venezuelans remain socialist. If you look at their opposition groups, they're still socialist. It's just they're socialists minus Maduro. It's like when that other moron there, I can't even remember his name, he's disappeared, that the U.S. tacitly back there when he was rabble-rousing. It's like, okay, the leftoids are trying to call him a capitalist stooge. He's literally just as socialistic as Maduro. The only difference is that he happens not to be part of Maduro's movement. He's like, okay, I want to keep the policies the same, but I'll be less corrupt. No, you won't. It's a bunch of horse shit. In Cuba, what we're dealing with is people who are essentially anti-com. Why don't we kick out the breadliners, send them to Cuba, and take a bunch of Cuban dissidents instead? They're just going to get killed or put in the gulag if they stay in Cuba. And here, the breadliners, they're always complaining about how evil the U.S. is. Well, then we'll buy your ticket. Hell, liquidate your property. Take all that money. You realize how much, your Beverly Hills manor is worth in Cuba? You liquidate that? I mean, you can't buy anything with it. Maybe some banana chips, but other than that, you'll be fine. You can definitely get an old 50s era car. It'll be in perfect working order with original parts and everything. It's basically... I can understand why Cuba is a tourist destination. But the thing is that the touristy, sort of cool, retro, hey, it's kind of stuck in the 50s and 60s side of Cuba is not what the average Cuban actually has to fucking deal with. They have to deal with censorship, constant suppression, the fact that their government is massively corrupt, militarized, and communist. That's what they have to deal with. It's not fun. Yes, you got all sorts of sparkling beaches and vintage cars and architecture that looks like a fusion between 80s Art Deco and like retro early 50s typical Havana Cabana stuff. You got all sorts of cool things, but then you've got like post-Castro. You've got socialism. And by the way, there are politicians in the U.S. that want to import it here. Why do you think that people like Bernie Sanders wouldn't want Cubans in the United States? Because they would universally condemn him. They'd say, look, you're literally expressing a desire for the kind of policies we fucking had to deal with. Fuck off, you piece of shit. Well, it's not great optics. Well, I wonder why Biden wouldn't want thousands of Cubans fleeing to the United States. He's probably worried. And then you got that idiot mayor down there of Miami, who I believe is actually a Republican, if I remember correctly, which doesn't surprise me. He's like, well, maybe we need to consider airstrikes against the Cuban regime. No, we don't. That's a terrible idea. The Cubans will have to solve this themselves, but if they come over, yeah, they have my respect. It's a little bit different from somebody who is not fleeing any form of political violence. Like, you have people in the Yucatan, they're like, well, things are shitty there. Yeah, okay, there's joblessness and cartels, but you're not going to get killed by your government for a topical difference of opinion the same way a Cuban can. And while there's, not a huge amount of access to, the online world, because other than cheap smartphones, most people don't have the money for modern computing there, the censorship level it's night and day. There's a big difference between Cuba, which is as insular and tin horn as China. There's a big difference between that and a simply dysfunctional regime like Colombia or something. Okay, you've got a dysfunctional government in Colombia, you do have riots and protests, and you have activity by FARC rebels and groups like that, but it's not on the same order of magnitude. In Cuba, there's not much resistance. The fact that tens of thousands of people would march through the streets knowing full well that if they get identified, they're going to be, at the very least, they'll be reprimanded. They'll be silenced for their bad behavior, and if not, they might be outright killed. Their whole family could be killed by the socialists in Cuba, because leftoids are always violent when they have control. That's why democratic socialism is just vote for me before I have your family killed. As opposed to regular socialism where they come in guns blazing and voting sort of... You end up with a one-party system usually, regardless. People in Cuba, it's interesting that the refugees coming from there, again, long-standing U.S. code is if they set foot, what is it, wet foot, dry foot, I think they call it. If they set foot on the beach and they're out of the surf, then they can become potentially a resident. They can claim asylum status. The idea is because of the severe nature of the regime, as opposed to Honduras, which is dysfunctional, but it's not the same, or Colombia, or something like that, or Peru. You've got, just because people are in poverty doesn't mean that you magically get a golden ticket to the United States. But if you're under a tin horn regime like that and you have shown, hey, I'm willing to risk getting killed just in order to be an itinerant in the U.S. compared to what I've got in Cuba, it's a little bit different for Biden to say, ooh, don't come. Like, remember when Kamala was trying to tell that to all asylum seekers, so-called, don't come, you'll be turned back. No, you're not going to turn anyone back. Most of these people that slip across, you won't even be able to process them. The system is completely overrun, so it's not going to happen. Cubans, meanwhile, there's only a trickle of them because they have to cross several hundred miles of open ocean, swarming with sharks, and patrolled by the U.S. Coast Guard, which will pick them up out of the water and ship them back, meaning that they get killed. Yeah, a little bit more respect for that particular kind of refugee, I must say. That's about all. Peace out.